What's going on, everybody? Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. We got great daily content all pertaining to Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Miami absolutely scorching the Hornets in last night's game, 144 to 117. They now move to 3-1 on the regular season with this win. And it was definitely a very exciting game considering last minute around yesterday afternoon, Norman Powell scratched from the game entirely with a groin injury. No timeline exactly on how long he might possibly be out for or when he could potentially return to the lineup. But not having Powell going into this game definitely, I feel like, gave Charlotte a little bit more of a confidence boost, especially with such a young core coming in. And they had a variety of guys scoring double figures in this one. But I'm going to get into a little bit more the overall defense Miami was able to at least inflict on limiting LaMelo Ball, I feel like, from comfortably playing in this game. But also, in addition to that, Miami really shooting the lights out overall from the field, shooting 54% from the field in this game, 44% from three. Not quite winning the rebound battle, but 144 points, nearly tying their season high 146 against the Memphis Grizzlies last Friday. Definitely adding to that average for Miami being a top 5 team in the league, being at least in points per game so far this year, their overall average, and then really showing off why they are deserving of that number 1 ranking in team overall pace. A lot of teams, or a lot of players rather, on Miami's roster on the positive side of the plus minus category in this game as well. Just a lot of exciting basketball to watch for Miami, especially in the absence of their leading scorer. And I think Miami did a great job plugging and playing in other players in the absence of Norman Powell. Payla Larson really stepped up in this game. I believe he had 12 points in the first half to go with 15 points 17 points in this overall matchup. Shot 6 of 10 from the field, really stepping up and making up at least for the lack of Norman Powell not being there. But obviously he wasn't the only player that really was able to step up for Miami in this game, as 7 players on Miami's roster in this game scoring in double figures in last night's game. The worst performance, I think, out of all 7 of those players coming from Kel'el Ware. Tough shooting night, 4 of 13, but still managed to bring in 14 of Miami's 144 in the matchup. And then in addition to that, it did take Bam Adebayo, I feel like, a little bit of time to get going more towards the second half, but overall had a really, really good game. 26 points on 10 of 16 shooting, to go along with 6 rebounds in this one. Also plus 29 when he was on the court. So definitely really helping Miami get out in transition, getting back on defense as well, in addition to contributing a whole plethora of points in Miami's win last night, against the Charlotte Hornets. So was kind of exciting to see Bam kind of retaking a little bit more of that all-star, superstar type of play that we're used to seeing at least come out of him, especially with a major piece of Miami's rotation not really in the mix tonight. Amongst the other players that scored in double figures, Andrew Wiggins actually looked comfortable shooting the ball from a lot of different points, whether it was beyond the arc or it was, at least kind of closer to the basket. 21 points in this game on 8 of 15 shooting. And that was definitely really promising to see, just because of how I feel like, at least during the preseason and in some of these games, he hasn't really been able to shoot the ball, I think, pretty efficiently. And this was kind of the first game I feel like he shot the ball fairly well. He had impactful baskets for Miami, and he was kind of able to at least kind of help get the ball rolling in momentum situations for Miami, for them to kind of help stay out front, go on to some runs, especially in the second quarter. They pretty much took over with about 10 to 9 pretty early into the second quarter, and then really were able to kind of hang on to that momentum going into halftime as they were up by 16, really pushing the pace in this game once again very well. And then in addition to that, like I had mentioned, Kel'el Ware, 4 out of the 5 starters in double figures. Jovic also having 10 points, also doing a really good job making some impactful buckets, despite, only having 4 of 7 and not being a major contributing scorer like we had maybe thought potentially we were going to see. But I still think it's a long season, and he could definitely be one of those main leading scorers. But I think he did a really good job facilitating the ball. He did a very solid job on defense as well. And in addition to that, Fontecchio was spectacular, I thought, off the bench, especially off the catch and shoot from beyond the arc. He had 2 of 4 from three, but those two threes were, or excuse me, 3 of 4 from three in this matchup. But I think the threes that he had, they were quite honestly, when I was watching the game, just his ability to kind of roll off of a lot of his fellow players in tight spots and was able to get off some pretty tough shots, in my opinion, were definitely impact type plays that were able to kind of shift the momentum for Miami in this matchup. So again, kind of going off what I was talking about in the last game against the Knicks, I feel like we saw this version of Fontecchio that we were really hoping to ultimately see in this trade for Duncan Robinson, where he was going to be a lethal three-point shooter off the bench that could come in, make a couple clutch buckets to help Miami get out early, kind of go on or at least begin to spark some sort of runs for Miami. But the main scorer, I feel like that made the biggest difference for the lack of not having Norman Powell tonight, and this is why he's my player of the game, would be Jaime Jaquez Jr. I mean, he balled out in this game. Had a ferocious dunk in the first half to kind of put the exclamation point on the 20-point first half he had in this game, finishing with 28 points in this matchup on 9 of 14 shooting. Not as vocal, really, at least on the scoring front in the second half, but this is a player who's coming off, quite honestly, a pretty disappointing sophomore slump, not averaging less than 10 points a game over the course of that season. And then I believe in his rookie year only averaged 11 points per game. So to see him now averaging 15 points a game, going into this matchup, he had averaged more than 70% from the field in those 3 games prior to this one against Charlotte. So seeing him can kind of pick up right where he left off in those 3 games in last night's matchup against the Hornets was a very exciting thing to see. The other thing that I want to note, there were plays he looked confident, dribbling around defenders, taking the ball up. I think overall, in comparison to the other games we had seen from him, he was actually taking care of the ball, looking more like a facilitating forward that Miami wanted him to kind of come more into form to be. He actually just looked confident. He looked like he knew where he wanted to be. He was a great trailing forward on a lot of those transition plays as well, but also was able to create some offensive opportunities for himself as well. And I think that was kind of a version of Jaime Jaquez we haven't necessarily seen at least play comfortably like that before. So that's why I would have Jaime Jaquez. That's my player of the game from this matchup against the Hornets. And I really think, at least in these 4 games, he's shown a very promising performance, and the hype, at least surrounding hopes of him potentially improving and being a focal player for Miami. Mind you, he scored all 28 of these points off the bench for Miami. Palo Larson starting in place of Norman Powell tonight. So the 28 points off the bench, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. Just to note, he did also kind of have starter minutes in this game with 28 minutes played, so he's really scoring a point a minute in this one. But again, very, very great game, I would say, from Jaime Jaquez Jr. Also had 4 rebounds and 5 assists, playing very, very well in Miami's fast-paced overall transition game that I feel like they've been developing. And if you told me going into this matchup that they were nearly going to tie their 146-point total performance from Friday's matchup against the Grizzlies, I would have also been very shocked. But again, hats off to Jaime Jaquez Jr. for having a really solid game and stepping up in the place of the absence of Norman Powell, because I would not have also thought that Miami was going to have such an overwhelming win over the Hornets, especially given that the Hornets are also playing pretty solid basketball. They had a number of players in double figures in this one too. All 5 starters scoring at least 10 or more points. Cal Kalkbrenner had a very solid game as well. Definitely was a little bit intimidating, I feel like, in the first half. Had a lot of clutch rebounds and also some pretty solid defensive plays. Wasn't giving anything up to Miami easily. Colin Sexton making some clutch buckets, and Con Knippel, also having a pretty solid 19-point performance on 7 of 15 shooting in this matchup against the Heat. But Sexton, I would say, probably had the best game out of anybody, at least on the Charlotte Hornets, just because 7 of 11 from the field, scoring from a variety of different points. Miami, I feel like, had the most trouble really finding ways to kind of contain him throughout the entire game, because while I will say LaMelo Ball did have a 20-point performance in this game, I think they did a pretty solid job of overall containing him in this game. I mean, he tied his season. Yes, it's only 4 games, and now the Hornets are 2-2. But the 2 wins that Charlotte had before this matchup against Miami were against Brooklyn and Washington. In my opinion, not really strong teams at all. and he tied his season low with 20 points in this one. However, he did only shoot 6 of 18 from the field, 4 of 12 from 3, and by the end of the game, Charlotte was taking him out because he clearly looked frustrated. 0 points in the second quarter. Mind you, he scored 15 of those 20 in the first quarter. So the entirety of the second half, he was pretty quiet. He really kind of just came out guns blazing, kept the game, kept Charlotte in contention going at least into the second quarter. But then I believe 2 major runs from Miami throughout the second quarter, or at least in the first half, definitely put them in the position to be up 16 at halftime. And it was just a very tough thing to watch, especially Miami. That run I'm mentioning, 19-3 to cap off the end of the second quarter. And because LaMelo Ball, I feel like, couldn't get going, or at least pick up where he left off from that 15-point first quarter, it definitely gave momentum to Miami to really take control of this game early. And yes, Charlotte did kind of dwindle that lead down to, I believe, 7 or 6 points at one point in the third quarter. But then Miami, again, found a way to shift the momentum. Jaime Jaquez also not necessarily contributing in that part of the game, but that was when Bam and Wiggins, I feel like, started to get a little bit more comfortable, especially Adebayo, getting a little bit more comfortable in his shot, at least at that point in the game. And because of that, Miami was able to keep their foot on the gas and really stay ahead of Charlotte throughout the rest of this contest. So hats off to Miami. Once again, I think they played to their strengths that they had, at least in these couple games prior, where they pushed the ball in transition very well. They played very fast. They were able to get efficient buckets very quickly. I didn't love every shot selection they had, but I would say about 75 or 80% of the looks they got off pretty quick. They didn't look rushed. They looked very comfortable. And if they didn't convert, they were able to get back on defense very solidly. So I think because they were able to kind of contain LaMelo Ball at least pretty well in the remaining 3 quarters of the game after he kind of popped off in the first, that definitely contributed to why Miami's offense was such a well-oiled, high-powered machine in this one. And we saw 7 players once again scoring in double figures. Again, Payla Larson stepping up in the absence of Norman Powell, but then Jaime Jaquez being an absolute beast off the bench. So if this is the Heat basketball we're going to see for the regular season, I really could see this team making a very solid playoff push, and a lot of teams being very afraid to go up against them, because at least with this, how this team is playing, you could kind of plug and play a lot of different players in Miami's rotation in and out of certain positions to step up on any given night, and they could be possibly a very, very hard team to contain. They had 100 points, 2 minutes left in the third quarter in this game. So they're scoring at a high clip, they're pushing the ball really fast, and they're playing great transition basketball, and they're playing it unselfishly. So I'm excited to see what they do over the course of the rest of this week. But this was a great game against Charlotte, and once again, I think they played to a lot of their strengths. The fast-paced, high-level basketball that they've been able to play, at least in the first 3 games prior to this one. But that's going to do it for today's episode of your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video, and of course, click that subscribe button for great daily content all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday's episode of your Miami Heat Latest. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great day.